Kia ora koutou, greetings and good morning, a very early good morning from Aotearoa, New Zealand. My paper is an interrogation of hegemony confronted by liberation ethics. Liberation theology as a development within Latin America and then wider Western circles meets resistance in the orthodox hegemony of former Soviet Eastern circles. This is particularly seen in the contemporary expressions of Russia and the Russian Orthodox Church, where discordant experience of East meets West. The Roaring Twenties, the 1920s that is, was a gay old time. It produced a full swing of an era of opulence, new styles of clothing, architecture, dance, and music, which finally shook free the strict order of the Victorian era with new ideas, new styles, new ways of being community. Women were gaining the vote in a number of countries and social freedoms were beginning more visible expression. Meanwhile, Art Deco arose, characterizing rich colors, bold geometric designs, and lavish ornamentation. Technology was leaping forward with the expansion of new transport, such as the motor car and the aeroplane. This era also gave hints of a new acceptance of diversity, cities such as Berlin giving liberating opportunities for people across class, gender, and sexuality. Yet for others, these places would be seen as dens of inequity. Yet for all this exuberance and hope of the Roaring Twenties, the storm clouds were a gathering of economic depression, fascism, and nationalism. Meanwhile, the era also gave rise to the style of music we know as jazz, which has its own theological touchstones, because jazz transgresses boundaries and anyone can participate. It blurs the lines of listener and player. It bounces to a contagious rhythm in a liberating power of swing, and it has many entry points. It has an emphasis that is shifted from the composer to the performer, who has the freedom to change melodies, harmonies, and to interpret the tune in individual ways. And jazz would evolve and morph through improvisation, the music that captures faith as always growing, drawing strength with ideas of elusiveness, non-fixivity, fluidness, and a resistance to closed definition and enshrined norms. So jazz, as with the whole era, can be seen as representative of many aspects of transgression, transformation, and even undermining traditional, normative, and orthodox. It maybe is a good reflection of liberation theology, and also, I suggest, queer theology. From this era, Cole Porter wrote musicals in a style that was subversive, sexual, clever, ironic, complicated, and contradictory. A more recent commentator, Scott Miller, suggests that one of his plays, Anything Goes, written in 1934, presents its own microcosm of a social, political, ironic, and often subversive point of view. Anything Go, he suggests, targets America's habit of turning religion into show business and criminals into celebrities, and makes an exploration of amorality and moral irony. Religion is particularly parodied in the musical when fake religious figures, the characters Reno and Mooney, lead a comic revival meeting, which presents a theology where you can be a good person and also have fun, drink, smoke, and dance in a song that couples religion and jazz as the sacred and the profane. The song is Blow, Gabriel Blow, and it sits amidst this fake revival meeting where sinners aren't asking for forgiveness. They just want to play all day in the promised land. It sings, I'm going to be as good as the day I was born, because I heard that man with the horn. Do you hear it? The song, quite simply in its title, also invokes an innuendo that points to sexual undertones and a social critique, and makes a cynical comment that religion really is a show business. Anything Go tells the story of America awkwardly struggling with the huge social and technological changes that were transforming the nation to a more diverse and socially liberal one. There was a fear that there would be a counter movement that would turn things back to that earlier, more innocent, more faithful and more moral era of the Victorian values. Moving forward to the 1960s and onwards, liberation ethics developed as a widening application that broke out of Latin America into the previously male, Western Eurocentric, heteronormative discourse on ethics and theology. Alongside this would be a wider sexual revolution, resulting in a reversal in the role of the church in relation to society's understandings and engagement with sexual and gender ethics. For some churches, the reactions have been progressive, and for others, there's been a retrenching into conservative theology and tradition. This resistance is noticeable in Eastern former Soviet countries, particularly in the hegemony of the Russian state and the Russian Orthodox Church. I take two press articles that highlight for me this divergence and resistance. The New Zealand Herald in January 22, just a month before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, includes the comments, quote, "Russia's present demands are based on Putin's long sense of grievance and his rejection of Ukraine and Belarus as truly separate sovereign countries, but rather as part of a historic Russian linguistic and Orthodox motherland. For Putin, liberalism is obsolete, and the dominant Western ideal of liberal democracy no longer has a place in the world." And then from the BBC, published just this month, a report that the Russian state has extended a 2013 law which made providing information about being LGBT to children a criminal offence to now include all adults. The article reported, quote, "Officials had urged politicians to enact the extension, portraying it as a part of a broader battle over civilization values with the West, and linking it to the decision to invade the Ukraine." Further, aside from the statement on state hegemony, religious hegemony is also referenced, quoting the head of Russia's Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill, as backing the new legislation. He's portrayed Russia's war in Ukraine as a battle between those who support pro-Western gay pride events and those who reject them. Herein is the breakdown of East-West engagement with liberation theology. Pantelis Karatis, a Greek Orthodox theologian, suggests that Eastern Orthodoxy does not have an advanced political theology that is comparable to the liberation theology of Western and global South contexts. He reflects on the Orthodox Church as traditionally grounded as being the state church of the Byzantium Empire's political system, and then later within the Ottoman state, found itself as closely associated with the preservation of identity, race, language, and ethnocultural identity. Together, this meant that critiques of either the state or the church was reacted against with neo-nationalistic defensiveness. Later in the 20th century, voices called for an escape from Western influence and a polarization of East and West. Alongside this commentaries, Stanley Harakis reflects on the 1990s and the evolving post-Soviet world for the Eastern Orthodox Church. While affirming the newfound realities of freedom on one hand, there was also expressions of such freedom. In the post-Soviet era, a range of issues arose that were not raised or addressed during the 70 years of Soviet domination, such as birth control, homosexuality, ecology, euthanasia, abortion, racism, and women in the church, issues for which it was unpracticed or approached in an antagonistic attitude. In essence, he suggests that East was meeting West, and they do not understand each other. In conclusion, the 1920s and 30s presented songs of liberation, winds of change, and hopes of opportunities. Jazz confronted respectable society and hegemony. In Cole's Porter, Anything Goes made a playful yet poignant critique of society and religion. In the course of the second half of the 20th century, liberation theology spread, but not through the Iron Curtain. At the post-Soviet crossroads of East meets West, there arose a mismatch of understanding of liberation theology. The disrupting song of liberation, especially queer liberation, irritated Russian hegemony, heteronormativity, and orthodoxy of both religion and state. New songs of disruption continue to arise. Just yesterday, a report of a team of queer mountaineers ascending the highest peaks across the globe in a campaign to tackle prejudice and hatred against LGBTQ+ people. The most recent summit that they've conquered happens to be called Vladimir Putin Peak, now located in the former Soviet territory of Kyrgyzstan. The LGBT climbers placed a rainbow and a Ukrainian flag on the hard-to-reach rock near a mountain summit that would be visible to everyone, while challenging for authorities to remove. Such are the disturbing songs of liberation that continue to critique sacred and societal hegemony. Blow, Gabriel Blow.
Thank you so much. As I was listening, the connection between these two papers that struck out to me was this idea of monodiscourse, monoculture totalizing monotheism as the dominant force, creating a dichotomy, and how this monodominance culture translate into our biblical translation, into our daily relationship through heterosexual normativity. In heterosexual society, the penis is given to understand that it is the mono, the dominant one. And the liberating aspect of these two papers is really challenged through Black, feminist, Latin American liberation hermeneutics, challenging the powerful. And we see this play of words. I was actually enjoying this Blow, Gabriel Blow, this reminds us of Jubilee, the year of resistance, year of restoration, and second coming. So I enjoyed this interplay of words, and in a heterosexual relationship, only the penis get to have an orgasm. But the sounding of trumpet, blow, Gabriel, blow, the disruptive sound of Jubilee gives us that hope of restoration of relationships, of orgasm for everyone, or restoring and challenging whiteness, totalizing form of thinking. So that ignited. And then the second point of connection, and which is also a question, is a little bit step back a bit and then to actually think about how these both papers are interdisciplinary and intersectional. In a way, it talks about intercultural and ecumenical and queer and hermeneutics and everything. And Tony, what is at stake when in these ecumenical spaces, as you have mentioned, and queer theology, when they come together, how do you deal with it? To me, in ecumenical, how I understand is or what I see is when you, in ecumenical spaces, you come across different denominations and different theological standings, and many a times LGBT discourses split churches. And one of the example is in previous session, this Communion of Churches in Indonesia, ecumenical churches, the member churches, they said no, they were against it. It's not simply pointing church at the Indonesia, but even in Western countries, such as in Netherlands, some of the churches, they give out statements, they are against it. So not simply a pointing finger at the East, but also it happens in the West as well. So in the name of unity, unity is upheld at the cost of queer lives, at the cost of justice. So there's unity in rallying against queer folk in churches. Also, if I'm mistaken, please correct me. When we say this, when we're talking about East and West, of course, Ottoman Empire, Russian, they are this empire on its own. And broadly speaking, East and then Orthodox, it kind of implies, you're not saying, but then it implies this East not as a whole, not favoring LGBT. And then there is this implication that the idea of homonationalism in ecumenical spaces, please correct me if I'm wrong. So when we do this, it promotes racism, support LGBT in a political stand as a political stance, and then racial prejudice is put forth. In this process, it dismisses and erases critical voices in the East. So you have specifically said East, Russian Empire and all this, but when broadly said East, it would be, it implies, yeah. So how do these ecumenical approaches be accountable, or as liberation theology would ask, who is left out? Who are sinners? Who wants to have fun? How can ecumenical theology continue to be, or ecumenism continue to be prophetic? So that is what I have to say for now. And yeah.
Comments.
Yes, thank you for both your listening and feeding back, and Inatoli, you've added some further depth for me to add into my paper when I complete it now. What is at stake was one of the questions in there. Part of that is the whole tension between broad brushstroke two streams of hegemony and hermeneutic, particularly hermeneutic, and how hermeneutic may challenge hegemony or reinforce hegemony. For queer liberation theology, very much one of the many expressions that have evolved out of the liberation theology arising in Latin America, has seen expression more in, shall we say, the West, and being cautious of being caught in that East-West language, but within so-called Western civilization, it's even probably a tension with global South in terms of discourse and where that sits. The paper was zeroing in on the particular expression of Orthodox, particularly in Russia, arising from the other part of what is at risk from my reading, and that is the actual life and well-being of LGBT people in Russia and former Soviet countries. When reports come through of people, LGBTQI people, being violently attacked and suppressed in those countries, and to understand how church and state have an interplay of hegemony and hermeneutic and condoning such action. So that's what's at risk to me, and feeds into my mentioned in the first paper of the session, Together Towards Life, a WCC document that I believe is very, as my interpreted from a health perspective, I think that I interpret it very much from a liberation theology perspective, because to get it towards light, a life and invokes a concern for the voices of the marginalized, so the voices of those who know pain and death. And therefore, what is the voice of the LGBTQI community when faced with a repressive regime as found from the Kremlin and from
Thank you.
orthodoxy?